Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit more about DC Superior Court. This learning initiative is a part of the DC Social Justice Transformation Network. If you're interested in learning more about the network, please check us out. A quick disclaimer that this recording is made as of June 29th, 2026, and we recommend that you ensure that the materials provided and the information provided are up to date as of the time that you are watching. As a brief overview, our learning objectives will include discussing the DC Superior Domestic Relations Branch, Domestic Violence Division, Landlord Tenant Court, and Housing Conditions Court. The goal of this discussion is to provide basic information at a high level to give you the chance to dive deeper into the resources that are available in each of these calendars while you are practicing in DC Superior. As a brief overview, DC Superior Court is located at 500 Indiana Ave Northwest. The Domestic Relations Branch and the Domestic Violence Division are located in the Moultrie Court building, and the Landlord Tenant Branch is located in Building B. The Domestic Relations Branch handles divorce, legal separation, annulment, child custody, visitation, paternity, and child support when related to custody or divorce. Pure paternity and support matters are in the Family Court, but in the Paternity and Support Branch. The Domestic Violence Division handles cases where people are experiencing abuse, threats, or stalking. The civil side of the division specifically handles civil protection orders, or CPOs, and anti-stalking orders, ASOs. The Landlord and Tenant Branch, LT, is within the court's civil division and has limited jurisdiction, only adjudicating eviction cases filed by landlords against tenants. The cases are typically involving foreclosed homes, squatters, or subtenants. Will also go through the landlord tenant branch. The Housing Conditions Court is a related branch, but separate from landlord tenant. In the Housing Conditions Court, tenants can sue their landlords for injunctive relief to fix housing code violations. So those are the branches that we will cover, and those are the issues that are covered within those branches. And I will briefly pause to give the folks joining me here today the opportunity to introduce themselves, starting with Kennedy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We hope this resource is very helpful. My name is Jenna Dinanini, and I'm the managing attorney for family law and immigration at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. I've been working in the family court from juvenile defense to paternity and support to all things domestic relations and domestic violence for about the last 10 years. So happy to answer any questions and provide any resources I can.
Thank you. And now, Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Tashima. I'm a staff attorney in the housing unit at Neighborhood Legal Services Program. I've been working in DC Superior in the Landlord Tenant Branch for about 3 years now, and have been involved in housing justice work in other cities for a couple of years before that. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Osberg, and I'm a staff attorney with the Domestic Violence Program at Volunteer Legal Advocates. I practice both the Domestic Violence Division and the Domestic Relations Branch of the DC Superior Court.
Wonderful. Well, as you can tell, we are joined by very experienced folks who are interested in sharing what it means to be a practicing attorney in DC Superior. And we're going to start with some basic information. We'll start with navigating our way into the building. And I wanted to get any helpful tips that you have in navigating security. And I'd love to start with you, Jenna D.
Sure. So for the main building, the Moultrie Courthouse, where the domestic violence branches or division and the family court, domestic relations branch, paternity support, etc. Most of the stuff besides the landlord tenant, which we'll discuss, is building B. Going through security, you go through the main entrance, although it's often very, very long in the morning because people arrive at 8:30 for their protective order hearings. And so there is a side entrance halfway down the block, down the stairs, that enters at the JM level of the courthouse. And that line is often much shorter as a pro tip. You can bring your laptops in and your phones, which is wonderful. You do have to take your laptops out, open them kind of like a hut in a separate bin, but you can bring them in, and you can also bring your lunch if you're working all day, outside drinks, etc., appropriate drinks, obviously, but everything except weapons are allowed pretty much. You cannot, take photos or video recordings unless you have explicit permission, but you can bring your phone in.
Thank you. Alyssa, do you have anything to add about the Moultrie Court building? You're muted.
I think that Jenny pretty much covered it. The only other thing that I'll add is if there's any trouble ever finding your way around the building, the information center is right at the beginning, or right at the front of the courthouse when you enter through the main security entrance on the first level, and they can be super helpful if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you. And Maria, anything about Building B that might be a little different?
Just that it's a different building from Moultrie, so if you ask someone for directions to the courthouse, you might be going the wrong way. Is a little bit hard to find the entrance because there are 4 different ways to enter, but I think 3 of them are barred. You enter through the parking lot.
Amazing. And we will share, there is a fantastic resource on Court 360 called the virtualdccourts.org. And that resource is available with the materials associated with this video. It includes a virtual interactive tour of the court. So you can click through the buildings, see where the rooms are, and get familiar with the courthouses before you even step foot on the campus. We highly recommend that you check that out before your first day in court. All right, so we're getting ready for our first day in court. We've made our way to the building. And now I'd love to get some more information on kind of how the court operates. If you can give some information on the insights to the calendars, kind of the numbers of judges you'll see, and any information about just the basics. So Jenny, can you give us a basic overview of what it's like to practice in domestic relations?
Within the domestic relations branch, a lot of things are happening, as Chris mentioned, but the domestic relations branch falls under a larger umbrella called the family court. And the family court division deals with a range of things from adoption to custody and divorce and child support, juvenile delinquency, mental health, special immigrant juvenile or vulnerable youth, name and birth certificate. So while we primarily practice in the domestic relations branch, we do dabble in things like adoption or peer paternity and support cases or name and birth certificate changes or appointment of a vulnerable youth guardian, etc. So I'll be providing kind of additional tips related to those branches involved in the family court. So for the family court, the domestic relations branch, we have a fabulous range of judges. We have 7 judges right now, and they all handle the cases from the initial hearing till final resolution. Within the family court, some of our judges might be assigned specifically to the vulnerable youth guardianship docket or the name and birth certificate docket. Some of our magistrate judges, so additional from our 7 domestic relations associate judges, are dealing with peer paternity and support issues. And so cases, while we have a ton of cases in family court in DC, they do move fairly smoothly and quickly, but the life of the case is going to depend on the case itself, that the issues at hand, how many kids are involved, the issues involving the parties or the children, etc. And so a case might wrap up really quickly, or it might take a long time, multiple years. Typically, though, from the time you file your complaint for custody or divorce, you're going to have a hearing within the next 45 to 60 days, and that's your initial hearing. At the initial hearing, all judges are going to meet the parties, understand what the issues are, see if service has been effectuated, and see if people have reached an agreement. Well, 99.9% of people have not. And so the judges are going to send you and your client to mediation. And the court has a free mediation program called multi-door mediation. And the court sends all the parties who don't have a resolution at the initial hearing to this mediation. And they expect the parties to mediate and then come back for a status hearing in a couple months to check in and see if they've reached a temporary or permanent resolution, or if we need to try something else, or if we're on a path to trial. If there is contested custody, you and your client will be ordered to attend the program for agreement and cooperation called PAC, and that will also happen outside the courtroom. DC Superior Court has a range of alternative dispute resolution options that are free for parties and attorneys. And so in the domestic relations branch specifically, we have the multi-door mediation. We also have 2 family law attorneys on site called the attorney negotiators that are employed by the court that will be able to help you and your client on the spot, hopefully reach a temporary or permanent agreement. So the judges typically pass a case, let you go speak to them, and then call a case later in the day. The judges also offer judicial mediation for free. So another judge who's not hearing your case is willing to listen to the arguments and kind of give a reality check to the parties, which is really nice. And then there's alternative dispute resolution. And there's a list of family law providers that agree to, if the court orders the ADR, they agree to do it at a reduced rate of $200 per hour. And or there are pro bono options as well for those in need of pro bono. So you just need to seek that with the judge. So there's many options for resolution. I can say you can get into court quickly, but how long your case will last will really depend on the variables in your case. The domestic relations branch hearings are all in person. So the court is expecting you to be in person. There are special circumstances. So if it's an uncontested divorce, the court might allow you to appear by WebEx. If you need to file a motion to appear remotely for safety of your client, or if there's a mixed status family, or somebody's traveling or in a care facility, etc., you just need to file that motion with the court. The court's pretty liberal in granting those. I will say that the court does automatically make all vulnerable youth guardianship and special immigrant juvenile cases remote. So those are going to automatically be remote. But everything else is going to be in person. There's a preference for in person now, unless you need to file a motion to appear remotely.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That's a really helpful overview. Alyssa, can you provide us a similar overview looking at the domestic violence division? Kind of how long are you staying in there? How long does it take to get through the court and things like that?
Absolutely. So under the domestic violence division, there's the civil side and the criminal side. The civil side, as Chris mentioned earlier, handles civil protection order and anti-stalking orders, and the criminal side handles DV misdemeanors and contempt of CPOs. On the civil side, there are just 2 courtrooms and 2 judges. They're courtroom 113 and 114, and they handle the CPOs, the anti-stalking orders, as well as extreme risk protection orders. But the case actually will start when the case is filed. If the petitioner seeks a temporary protection order, it will start with a magistrate judge who holds an ex parte hearing the same day or next business day after the petitioner files their petition for a civil protection order and requests that temporary order. But either way, whether or not there is a temporary protection order hearing, the first hearing in the CPO or ASO case is set 2 weeks after filing. And if service is accomplished before that time, the case may even move forward and conclude on that same day, just 2 weeks after filing. Or if not, if there hasn't been service or if the parties are going to trial, it may be set out further. The cases can be set out 28 days at a time at each hearing. So the case can be concluded after 2 weeks, or it can be a longer timeline where you're going back about once per month with your client. If the respondent shows up to the first hearing, both parties will speak with the attorney negotiators, which are similar, like in the domestic relations branch. They are attorneys employed by the court who speak with both sides to try to see if the parties are able to come to a negotiated resolution instead of going to trial. And this typically looks like a consent without admissions order, which has the same enforceability as an order entered after trial, but doesn't require any findings that the respondent did what is alleged in the petition. If the parties are able to come to a consent, that can be entered that same day, and the case can be concluded that day as well. Alternatively, the case will be set out for trial. So the timeline is a lot quicker often in the domestic violence division. As long as service is accomplished, it can be wrapped up within 2 weeks or a month. For the domestic violence division, the hearings are remote and in person, so parties and counsel have the option of appearing remotely on WebEx or in person until the case is set for trial, and at that point, the court will require the parties to be in person. And for for remote hearings, generally, other than trials, cases are typically set on the morning calendar, and check-in is required at 8:30, unless the judge sets you for another time. But typically, check-in starts at 8:30, and the whole calendar is set at that time. And the order of cases just depends on who's present in each case and what the judge's calendar is like.
Amazing. Thank you, Alyssa. And Maria, can you give us some more of an insight on what goes on in Building B?
Yes, so in landlord and tenant, when you're dealing with eviction cases, you'll go in front of magistrate judges for the most part, which means that at the beginning of the first hearing in the case, the judge will ask you whether or not you consent to a magistrate. Usually there's a cycle of about 3 magistrate judges at a time, going through the 3 different primary landlord-tenant courtrooms. Sometimes you'll go in front of an associate judge if someone is, out sick or something like that. If you deny consent to a magistrate, or if you file an answer in jury demand, you'll get sent over to Moultrie and the civil branch and go forward in front of an associate judge. The first hearing in eviction court is remote. So if you're an attorney, you have to log on with WebEx with your video on, but tenants can just call in. But most of your hearings after that will be in person. Um, Allegedly, that's so that tenants and landlords are encouraged to reach settlement agreements in the hallways, but it definitely adds a little bit of time to our schedules to have to go to court. Um, Eviction cases, if there's an attorney involved, can take quite some time. They'll usually take a year. Sometimes they can go longer. I've seen cases go like 2.5 years. When there isn't an attorney involved, cases can be as quick as 2 or 3 months. So there really is a big difference in the timelines of the cases. It depends on what types of hearings you ask for, and it depends on the defenses that you're able to raise in your eviction case. Housing Conditions Court is entirely remote. They only have hearings on, I believe it's Tuesdays. Some months there'll be like 2 or 3 sessions, so 2 or 3 Tuesdays where there are hearings. Other months it'll only be one Tuesday. It really just depends on how many cases are pending. In HCC, there will be a judge, but there will also be a Department of Buildings inspector. And so the judge will work with the landlord, the tenant, and the DOB inspector to figure out a good time to have an inspection take place so that the court has a neutral report that shows what type of conditions issues are still occurring in the tenant's unit. In HCC court, you basically just keep going back to court until the repairs are done. Each hearing takes there's usually about a 2-month period in between each hearing so that there's time for an inspector to come out and then time for the landlord to make repairs. And I should just mention that hearings in both LT and HCC are very quick. So you might spend a lot of time waiting for your case to get called, but once you're called, it'll probably take about 5 minutes.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next thing that we'd like to talk about and cover is the clerk's office. We've talked about generally what those courts cover and what resources are available in them. What kind of issues or questions do you direct to the clerk's office?
For the clerk's office in the domestic relations branch or the family court, you're going to work with the central intake center for their office. That's where you'll file in person, or if you're an attorney, you'll file on Case File Express. Most people are filing in person, though, self-represented litigants, or by emailing familycourtcic@dcsc.gov. I think for the clerk's office, you're really kind of administrative issues, right? This isn't docketed correctly, and this is missing from the docket. How do I file this? How much is it? They're not accepting my payment, etc. Can I get a copy of this? If you need certified copies or copies of documents, that's going to be a separate office. That's going to be the DR correspondence office. And then you also can get certified copies in JM 300 of different orders, marriage certificates, etc. For the clerk's office, I would say, again, it's mostly administrative and for filing purposes. In the domestic relations branch, most of your communications are going to be directly to chambers. And obviously, you can't have an ex parte conversation with chambers, so you're emailing chambers and CCing all parties involved in the case. But Chambers is very responsive and has a very strong command of their own calendar. So when you're asking to vacate a hearing or a continuance or getting clarification from the judge, you are really emailing Chambers directly.
Amazing, thank you. Alyssa.
In the domestic violence division, it's pretty similar to the domestic relations branch. Really administrative questions are what you're communicating with the clerk's office about. Filings, also to retrieve documents in a case it's not a separate office like it is in domestic relations. You can confirm whether filings were received, and you can also, if MPD is helping with service in this case, you can reach out to the clerk's office to confirm whether they've received a return of service or have any updates about the status of service in your case.
Thank you. And Maria.
LT clerks are also there primarily in terms of what attorneys ask for, to double check that filings have been accepted, to make sure that everything's in order, for example, that you're on the service list. I will say that for tenants, they're particularly useful in terms of letting them know what documents they need or giving them templates. The landlord tenant clerks also have an automated phone system. So you can type in your case number and then get your court date. And if you have an eviction schedule, to let you know when that eviction's been scheduled for. We unfortunately are not really able to communicate with the judges in our cases just because they switch so often. So for example, all of our motions occur in courtroom B53, but the judge in that court can change every week. So you don't really know who's going to be your judge until you show up. So you can email the clerk's office just to try and get a message to the judge, or just to try to figure out what's happening with the hearing. For example, if you have an emergency motion, you would talk to the clerks to try and get it scheduled. But most of the times you won't really know what's happening until you show up to court.
That's really interesting. So we've mentioned slightly, we mentioned some of the things that you rely on for the clerk's office versus chambers, and it seems like the clerk's office is much more of that administrative question. I'm wondering if we can just tease out what you would reach out for with chambers, best practices, and any advice or any tips that you might give in reaching out to chambers. Jenny.
Yes, reach out to chambers only when you need to. Don't become a frequent flyer email just because. Think ahead, be strategic, and think about, what do I actually need to ask? What do I do not? Obviously, you need to email chambers and CC all parties. That's very important. You're not litigating issues over email or engaging or arguing with opposing party or opposing counsel over email. It's really, the parties jointly agree to continue the hearing on Friday. We're both available in August. What does the court have available? It is, my client is a Spanish speaker. I'm just reminding the court that we're going to need the Spanish interpreter on Friday. It might be, can the court clarify what they meant by this order? Or we noticed an error in this order. The parties agreed to correct page 5, bullet 6, whatever it may be. So it's substantive, but mostly administrative, if that makes sense. You're not engaging in arguments or litigating things over email, but you are, sending substantive/administrative questions to chambers to move the case forward. I will say the court does have a fabulous interpretation program, translator and interpretation program. And so if your client needs any services, ASL, CDI, Spanish, Amharic, you name it, just let the clerk know in advance, the clerk in the chambers. So emailing chambers and let them know, and they'll make sure that they're ready for the hearing.
Interesting. So your administrative questions are going for the clerk for filings and things like that, but interpreters, those questions are going to chambers.
Yes, in family court, the judges really have a strong command of their own calendars and really run everything independently. So you're really working, and you're with that judge for the life of your case, unless the calendars switch, right, which they do every January. But people are on the family court for at least 3 years on a rotation. So you'll typically have the same judge for the life of your case. Some situations you won't. And so you're really interacting with that judge directly about this matter.
Interesting. Thank you. Alyssa, could you give us some insight into chambers versus the clerk's office, when you're relying on them and how?
So I would say we're emailing with chambers pretty sparingly. The judges, for context, the judges on each CPO calendar have about 30 cases per day on the morning calendar. So you're really only emailing with chambers if it's absolutely necessary. And often chambers will tell you when they want you, the court will tell you when they want you to email chambers with what it's necessary. Usually if you have a proposed order, the judge will ask you the proposed order to send over. If there's a document that you thought was docketed and it wasn't, you can send it over to chambers, but usually at the direction of the court. The only other times that we're really communicating with chambers is, like Jenny said, to tell the court that the parties have a consent, that it doesn't need to be set for trial anymore, that it can be converted to a status hearing, or if the other party is being held in jail and needs to be brought over from the jail. That's the other time that we often email with chambers. Otherwise, we are really communicating with the clerk's office or communicating with the court directly during our hearing with the courtroom clerks.
Thank you. And Maria, you mentioned that there isn't as much of that chamber structure. Can you give us some insight into where you might get these questions answered or how you navigate that?
Yeah, so for us, we primarily talk to the clerks. I think in my 3 years in LT, I've emailed a judge in landlord tenant court maybe twice. And that was only when they asked me to send them a proposed order, for example. 1 year in Superior Court. So if you've been transferred to a civil judge, you'll email them a little bit more often. You'll have to serve them with your documents, serve them with proposed orders. But in LT, that really doesn't happen. And I think the judges actually seem kind of reluctant to give out their emails anyways. So they really do not want communication from attorneys or tenants or landlords.
No, thank you.
Can
All
I give
right.
one pro tip?
Of course, please.
One pro tip in family court is to send a courtesy copy often to chambers, because when things get docketed or filed through the clerk's office, it could be a few days before they actually get to chambers. So if you need the judge to see something before, like a motion to appear remotely or a motion for consent and to continue or vacate the hearing or anything like that, we often will send chambers a courtesy copy so that they receive it before the actual hearing. So if you're on a tight deadline, but again, only do that if necessary in those situations.
Thank you. That's really helpful. All right. Now I wanted to ask about some online resources. We've talked about how folks are potentially appearing virtually, and the kind of support that is available to folks that are potentially appearing virtually. I'm just going to ask each of you, what are the virtual, what are the virtual resources that you have used, and what are the resources that you know are available to you? So I'll start first with Jenedy. What are the virtual resources that you use?
Yeah, I use a lot of virtual resources. So we love virtualdccourts.org, both for our pro bono attorneys and for our clients, because it helps them really orientate themselves to the court and answer a lot of questions. You can see a courtroom where the plaintiff sits, the defendant, where the judge is, etc., and really kind of demystify what court is going to be like, which is a lot of the fear for people going into court. We use lawhelp.org/DC, which has almost every civil practice area, and there's handouts. There's self-represented forms, videos, etc. We also use the DC Courts website. They just redid it and it's fabulous. So I encourage you to go check it out. There's all new links and it's restructured. It's really easy to navigate. And then we use the DC Bar's Family Law Pleadings for Self-Represented Litigants link that I'll share. And that has on-demand videos, on-demand Know Your Rights in a lot of different content areas. It has AI videos that guide you through how to fill out different self-represented forms or prepare for a hearing or navigate the child support calculator. And then we have a bunch of pro se pleadings as well. And then I also go to other legal service providers' web pages often, Children's Law Center, Legal Aid, NLSP, VLA. They all have great tips and resources on them. So oftentimes I'll Google something and it will come up and take me to one of those sites. So
amazing. Thank you. Alyssa, what virtual resources do you use when navigating court?
Yes, so the first resource that I wanted to highlight is on the DC Superior Court's website. The list of the judicial assignments for the year includes the courtroom, the judge's name, and the link to their WebEx room. So that's, of course, where we get the links to send to clients and for ourselves, but also can be helpful to, like Jenedy said, for pro bono attorneys or clients to get a look at what court is like before their day in court. Anyone can watch the proceedings in 113 and 114. So anyone can log in as an observer and just observe court to get a feel for what it might be like. The other resource that we use is just the forms that are on the DC Superior Court website. We direct clients that we're not going to be able to assist to those forms, and we also use those forms even as templates for ourselves sometimes.
Amazing. And Maria, what are the resources that you use virtually?
I use the court website a lot to look at the rules for landlord-tenant court. All the rules for the different branches are available on their website. I could download them and just look at a PDF, but I'm always scared that the rules will get updated and I won't know. So I basically look at the website every single time. In terms of resources online, lawhelp.org/DC is very helpful for landlord-tenant resources. There are a lot of great guides for helping you understand eviction cases. I believe the DC Pro Bono Center has like a repository of documents for attorneys. So I definitely recommend getting in touch with them if you need some assistance or need a pointer. And I also think that if you happen to know a legal services attorney who does LT cases, or even if you don't know someone, if you email anyone, I'm sure we would help you and give you whatever you needed.
I feel like that's a huge emphasis in the highlighting what Jenny and what Maria had pointed out is the availability of our community to answer questions. I think there are so many legal service organizations here in DC that are working on these different issue areas, and they're have created different resources, and we definitely recommend checking out all of the organizations that are operating within your practice area, because they might have a resource that's slightly different from the things that are available to you at your organization that you might find specifically helpful, and it is absolutely available for you to use, so please do so.
Can I add something? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
So, to what my colleague said about attorneys, if you need resources, there is probono.net/DC, which the Pro Bono Center runs. You just need to request to become a member. It should be approved easily if you're a provider or, an attorney working on a case. And that does have a whole list of resources for every practice area, example pleadings, retainers, training videos, etc. And then DC Kin Care Alliance, one of the organizations that helps third parties, publishes a fabulous guide every year that is all encompassing for third party caregivers and has a lot of grandparent caregiver programs and public benefits information, etc. So that's a great resource for parties that have third parties involved in their case.
Thank you.
All right,
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to add one thing. For Housing Conditions Court, DC Legal Aid has a great handbook about Conditions Court, and they'll go through it step by step. It's helpful for pro se tenants. It's helpful for attorneys who are new to HCC. So I definitely recommend just like Googling DC Legal Aid HCC, and you'll get that pretty extensive handbook from their website.
The last section that I would like for us to cover today are the help centers or court helpers. I'd like to just highlight where there are opportunities to either get involved as a pro bono attorney, or if somebody would need help while navigating, or kind of what are those help centers, what happens in them. All right. So first I'm going to turn to Jenny to ask about what are the help centers in DRB and what are they used for?
In the family court, specifically in the domestic relations branch, there are several help centers and resources for litigants and for attorneys. So I'll start with the ones that are staffed by legal service organizations. So there is the Family Law Assistance Network, or FLAN, which is a partnership with the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, Legal Aid DC, and the DC Affordable Law Firm, or DCALF. And we staff at the court in room 1195. So right when you come in the main entrance, there's the information desk, and then there's FLAN. And we're open from 9 to 3. And I call us the ER of family law because we provide rapid same-day resources and legal advice and often representation. So a judge might pass a case, send somebody down, they need help, and we're in court later that afternoon with them. The same is true for the Child Support Resource Center, which is located downstairs outside of Judge Crane's courtroom in a little ante room. That's outside of JM 13, so the floor below. And that is staffed by Legal Aid DC and Bread for the City. And they're also open Monday through Friday, I believe 9 to 3. And they provide people with support in the paternity and support branch, which is very high need. So they're doing the same thing, the rapid response every day, anything from legal advice to representation. Then there's this Family Court Self-Help Center, which is in JM 570. So on that JM level, right across from the Central Intake Center. And that is staffed by the court and ran by the court. And that is a self-help center with no income guidelines. They don't provide legal advice or representation, but they provide legal information. And so people will walk in, it's first come, first serve. There's no jurisdiction requirements, no income limits. And if you need an interpreter or services, they will provide it. And they're often walking people through the forms, helping them navigate the court process, how to file, how to serve, and giving them legal information, and then referrals to legal service providers. I want to highlight a few resources that might be helpful to you when you're working with clients in the domestic relations branch. So there's a supervised visitation center, which is a court program that will help with visitation both in person and remote. There's a child care center. So if your client's coming and they can't afford child care or have to bring their kids with them, there's a child care center where they can check their kiddos into during the hearing. There's a DNA testing lab site in the courthouse in JM 175. There's also a drug testing unit. So oftentimes people order to spot tests or parents accused of being having a substance use disorder, etc. And that's in the bottom level by the cafe. And then there's a custody assessment unit. And the custody assessment unit is really helpful because they will go out and do brief focus assessments for cases. So maybe you need them to just go do a focus assessment on if the other parent's taking the kid to school. They will go out and do home studies for the parties, and then they will also do mental health evaluations. So a lot of services to provide the information that judges need to make the best decision in the cases in family court. Also, if your client is having a hard time testifying or they're a survivor or there's something very traumatic that's happened, you can always motion the court for Pepper, the service dog, to attend the hearing and accompany the person for emotional support. So just want to flag that resource as well.
Thank you so much. Alyssa, what
Yes.
resources are available and the help centers available to the DVD court?
Yes, so in DVD, the Help Center is the Domestic Violence Intake Center, which is located on the fourth floor of the DC Superior Court next to the clerk's office. And there's also a satellite office in Southeast near the big chair. And the intake centers are staffed by court employees, clerks, by legal aid DC and volunteer legal advocates, attorneys, as well as domestic violence advocates from DC Safe. And so pro se parties are often filing through the Domestic Violence Intake Center. If a survivor is interested, they can meet with an advocate from DC Safe who can connect them with other resources, including legal service providers, housing questions, anything, crime victims compensation, anything that a survivor might need to support them in the process. And they can also speak with a legal provider, like I mentioned, from Legal Aid DC or volunteer legal advocates. And often they're also being referred from the Domestic Violence Intake Center out to other legal service providers who may be able to take the case for representation. So the intake center is really like a one-stop shop for survivors and for pro se parties who are working who are litigating in the domestic violence division, but they can also be a helpful resource for attorneys to go get documents, to check on filings. Like I said, they kind of have some overlap with the clerk's office as what they're able to help with.
Amazing, thank you. All right, and Maria, to wrap us up, what are the help centers available for folks navigating landlord-tenant or the housing conditions court?
Yep, so these are primarily help centers for pro se tenants. There's the Landlord Tenant Legal Assistance Network, which is staffed by, I believe, 6 legal services organizations in DC. So there are a lot of organizations that do housing cases, and they can also talk to you about housing conditions issues. And then there's also the DC Bar's Pro Bono Center. They will also talk to you about eviction cases and give legal advice. LT Land, you can do intakes by phone, in person at the courthouse, or through an online form. Their hours are available on their website. Sometimes they're closed for holidays. So at the time we're recording this, LT Land's actually closed for the week. And I think what's particularly helpful for tenants, especially as hearings become in person, is that you can talk to an attorney on the same, it's the second floor of Building B, so the same floor as all the court hearings that you'll have, well, most of the court hearings you'll have in eviction court. You can go talk to an attorney there. I will say it takes a couple of hours sometimes to get an attorney, so it does take some time. But for attorneys, I think the resources we previously talked about are probably a bit more on point.
Thank you. Amazing. Well, I want to give you both some space. If there's anything else that you would like to add, please feel free. But I think we've covered it. Alyssa, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we hop off for today?
I would just add that if there are attorneys who are interested in taking cases in the domestic violence division, there are so many great organizations that supervise pro bono attorneys on these types of cases that we talked about today, including volunteer legal advocates, but there's many, many more that represent parties, petitioners, and respondents. So I would just encourage people to reach out to organizations and look at the websites and see what interests you.
Amazing. Thank you. And Maria.
Yeah, I echo what Alyssa says. There's a great need for attorneys in housing. I think it's something like 96 or 7% of tenants are unrepresented, while almost all landlords have attorneys. And it makes a big difference if a tenant has an attorney, especially as we talked earlier about timelines, that, you know, having an attorney can mean the difference of having an eviction happen in 3 months versus like a year and a half later. I think all of the organizations in DC would happily accept pro bono attorneys. So you can definitely reach out to any of them. I believe DC Pro Bono Center also has a really robust network of like housing attorneys. So they'll refer them cases out to different legal services providers. So I mentor a couple of attorneys through the Pro Bono Center. So if you're confused about like which group to reach out to, or you want someone that has a bit more organization, Pro Bono Center is a good place to start.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this virtual orientation on DC Superior Court. We hope that it's helpful in navigating your first steps into DC Superior and supporting your clients in achieving access to justice. Please make sure that you access the written materials that are associated with this video to get access to the helpful links and guides that were discussed throughout our training today.